So this is the second of two talks during Advent and our Care for Humanity season. We had a wonderful talk 2 weeks ago. Lavon talking about her work with Native American communities, and Alan talking about prison visiting. And I'm really pleased tonight that Carmela and Graham are going to talk to us. And I'll say a very brief word in a moment to introduce Carmela. I think is going to talk first, but perhaps we can begin with our Advent prayer, which Katie is going to read to us.
Lord of hope and life, Advent is come, and we pray that it be in our homes and in our hearts as we heed the cry of the prophets, arise, awake, look around and see. With open hearts we ask to walk these days with you, mindful of so many who live in need of consolation, strength, hope, peace, and justice. Help us to see this world in the light of Advent, knowing that fullness of life comes from the shelter, care, and kindness we give and in turn receive. In this time of stillness and waiting, we offer ourselves just as we are, in faith and in love, and in response to your call.
Thank you, Katie. So this evening, as I said, we're going to hear from Carmela, and I was going to introduce Carmela and Graham, but really they don't need any introduction. Just suffice to say, starting with Carmela, that she's over her working life, she's sort of worked in two main areas. One is teaching, and the other is working in hospices. That's not the full story, but it's the two main pieces. And she worked in the Sue Ryder Hospice and also in St. Joseph's Hospice in Hackney, that many people will be familiar with. Tonight she's going to talk to us about her work in the hospice movement and care for the dying more generally. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Carmela, and Adam's going to host Carmela's slides. So thank you to Adam.
Thank you. I was thinking when I was thinking about the talk, I particularly thought I wanted to acknowledge that for anybody, the experience of caring for somebody else, another person, a loved one, a family member, at the end of their life will be absolutely unique to them. And I'll imagine that this is true for many members of the community. And for some of the community, I do know it'll be both personal and a professional way that they've experienced this. So I do want to say that these reflections are just very, very much my own reflections on this. And so I'd like to begin with this slide, which I think is how I see care at the end of life. And it's a very favourite quote of mine because it was the school motto of my last school, but it has come to mean a great deal to me. I am come that they might have life and have it to the full. And it might seem slightly paradoxical to begin with these words of Jesus. It's a stark contrast, really, to the way we understand the end of life, which seems to be about diminishment, frailty, sickness, and often sorrow and anguish. But for me, the fullness of life encompasses every aspect of our lives, because we're on a journey and every part of our lives, mine and yours, is part of this. So for fullness of life is that we live in relationship. I am fully alive, fully human, fully myself, only insofar as I am in relation to others. And I think for me, it's this aspect I think is important in reflecting on care at the end of life, particularly in light of the recent bill that's gone through Parliament. And I think these words, particularly of Cicely Saunders, also count a good deal. You matter because you are you, and you matter to the end of your life. We will do all we can not only to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die. And Cicely Saunders, of course, was the founder of the UK hospice movement. She worked at St. Joseph's. I remember seeing her striding through the reception area. She's quite formidable. And she later founded St. Christopher's. And it seems to me a little bit worthwhile to begin with some of the facts about hospice care, which I think have been not really to the forefront. We've got, as of 2023, these figures, we've got roughly 220 hospices providing inpatient and outpatient care for around 300,000 people. Now that seems a lot, but when you think the total UK population is 68 million, that's probably very, very small. The palliative care providers include some 900 doctors who are part of the 16,000 care professionals, nurses, all the other kind of care professionals that would be involved. The total cost is 1.6 billion, and of this, 1.1 billion tremendously is raised through charitable giving. It's astonishing that that amount is raised through charitable giving, and just 0.5, if I got my sums right, is given by the government. So it highlights how the care provided is consequently pretty uneven in response to geography, economics, and really, I think, raises quite a lot of questions, which I do think have come to the fore in recent times a little bit more, but certainly I feel could be much more strongly provided. I'm just going to go a little bit into the background and the hospice movement and then how it came to be in the UK, which is where I came to know St. Joseph's. So as probably some people know, the word hospice, hospital goes back to about 1060. It was a place of refuge for the sick and the weary, often the travellers to the Holy Land. And Malta, with the Knights of Malta, was one of the places for the early beginnings of the hospice movement. And then it found its way gradually through the history of Europe. I think some of you may know the famous Isenheim altarpiece, which was in a wonderful monastic hospice in Germany. And it most notably developed in the 19th century in France. And then in the 20th century, which is, I think we'll probably have our next slide, is Cardinal Vaughan was very keen to invite the Irish Sisters of Charity to come and give care to the population of the East End, who were very, very poor indeed. Disease, malnutrition, TB were rampant. It took him quite a while, about 30 years, but around 1905, he had persuaded the rector of Farm Street Jesuits, Sir Father Galway, and who then brought 5 of the Irish Sisters of Charity over to set up what was to become St. Joseph's Hospice in Hackney. And they were to care for the poor and the dying of the East End. One of the first patients was a tram driver, a Mr. Whelan, and he was carried in by his friends. He was suffering from consumption. They had an old house, which was funded by a wonderful lady, contributed by a wonderful lady called Grace Goldsmith, who provided a great deal of financial support. And the sisters had a big house that became several houses on the current site in Mare Street, which is now a much more modern building, which is where I worked for some years. And as I look at this, I've got a great deal of affection for it. I worked on the top floor there of St. Anne's and reception, where people came and went. And it was immediately on all the hustle and bustle, and still is, of the main street in Hackney. The modern St. Joseph, where I worked, the idea of hospice is for those who are ill and weary on their journey, is something that Cicely Saunders believed that St. Joseph's still holds at its core. And she said, which I think I've got on the next slide, is when she gave her speech accepting the Templeton Foundation Prize, if I could have she said, hospice is about a special kind of living, and in a sense is still concerned with travelling. Patients and families, staff and volunteers who meet them, find they're drawn into a journey of the spirit. And she, having worked at St. Joseph, she firmly believed that their ethos. And I think that's true, still is, this idea you're accompanying people on a journey. I came into the hospice work by chance, not by chance so much as a combination of circumstances, but I'd already had significant family experience. And I felt I knew a little bit about how patients might feel. And it had had quite an impact on me. I worked as an auxiliary nurse, which you would now call a nursing assistant. And initially it was at a Sue Ryder hospice. And I'd worked with Sue Ryder and her husband just after college. So I knew them. That was very, very important to me. It became a learning at every level for me, because it was not only about the daily practicalities of how you cared, literally for every part of bodily care and being with your patients, but beyond that, it meant what it meant in terms of trust and dignity. And something that's always stayed with me was the advice of our first matron, which was listen beneath what the words that are being said, listen beneath what's being said. And that stayed with me pretty much all my life. I think it's something I've tried to carry into other areas. The trust we built with our patients extended to being part of the team of nurses and doctors and other health professionals surrounding those in our care. It was suggested I extended my training, so they sent me off to do training and counselling so I could accompany the patients, but we were beginning to develop that surround care that we would now take perhaps for granted in the hospice setting. Hospice care today has become not merely the end of life, but a place of respite, a place where pain care is addressed. And of course, we now have the development of hospice who are specifically for children with life-limiting illnesses. I often found that caring for others on a daily basis didn't leave me or anyone very much time to reflect. You're far too busy, and someone said what you need is patience and humour and a good deal of nosiness. You need to be interested in people and remember the details about them, the small things that count, that matter to them, and particularly if they have a family or if they're without a family. And you often are drawn into accepting the complexities of all of their lives that come with them. But to the forefront always is how to give the physical comfort and care that's so specific to each person. And just a small thing is, how you turned your patients, the use of pillows and tiny pillows, what they preferred, how the light was in the room, how the sound was. All of this would come in. And that was your main preoccupation of most of the days. So the idea that we reflect in some kind of very idealized, high-flown way doesn't come at all. You're just getting on with what has to be done for the people who are there. And it's very, very much a two-way process. It was certainly a time when I learned a great deal about myself and about others. St. Joseph's welcomed people from every faith and those of no faith, every background and culture. We were in a tremendously diverse, people will know in Hackney, very diverse community. We had the Orthodox Jewish community, we had the Greek Orthodox, we had Muslim communities, we had people of no faith, of every faith. And what I've realized then, particularly, in meeting the end of life, you were traveling with your patients. I've found death to be this huge invisible veil. You suddenly realize how fragile life is. You're on this border always. And there's a phrase that a writer uses, Marilyn Robinson, the givenness of things. You just realize how very strongly that this moment is given. And of every thing that we were asked to do, one of the most important, valued moments for me was sitting with patients. The very end of their life, they were people who are never left alone. If there's an hour or two and patients don't have friends or family with them, then you automatically sat with them. You might hold their hand, you always talk to them. And everything around you simply doesn't matter. It's just being with this person and realizing the enormity of this moment in that person's life. I've sat with people who were road menders and people who were teachers and professionals, people of every dimension and every background and every age group. And it's an enormity. And what you're just doing sitting there is wasting time in the most valuable way. And I'll just tell a brief story about one patient. I remember one November evening, it was just going dark and the lights had come on and it was rainy and it was wet outside. And I was sitting with a patient called Bridget, and she'd been quite busy and chatty in the day. And she suddenly seemed quite tired, and so got her onto bed and she leant back against the pillows and she closed her eyes and she said to me, "There's one more day." And I just sat there and held her hand, sat with her. And it suddenly hit me with the most overwhelming realization that her journey was beginning right now. At this second, she was journeying forward. And it was quite an overwhelming insight. And it was a big moment of discovery. And she did die the next day. There were an awful lot of mundane moments when you weren't very gracious and you were endlessly folding sheets and changing beds. There were struggling moments. There were lots of funny moments. One nursing friend was very good at Irish step dancing, and we had a very good floor. So there was a lot of step dancing up and down the corridor. So it was great fun. And we always drew the patients into all the jollities going on. And of course, there were the quiet spaces as well. When later on I cared for my mother along with my family, it was both similar and different, because you're caring this time for a loved person with whom you have a lifetime story. And you're also more dependent on those supporting you at their moment. In our case, it was the wonderful Macmillan nurses and the district nurses and the hospital team. But if I look back and I think about faith in all of this, you aren't praying, you aren't thinking about faith. When you look back, I simply do really believe that what we just simply get on and do is the prayer itself. I think for the patients, their life stage, it's a prayer in itself. And for us, journeying with them, it's a prayer in itself. And nothing else needs to be said. That's how I feel about it. And this kind of brings me back to where I began. I feel very strongly that the narrative in our society values individuals on what they can offer or do, and very often that's purely economic. And it can diminish or devalue the care we give each other at the most fragile points in our lives. And these can be many, not just the end of life. I've always loved the phrase I and thou, used by Martin Buber, and it sets relationship at the center of existence. To be fully who I am and for you to be fully who you are is possible only in relationship. And for me, the presence of God is integral to that. And it's a realization I've come through in the journey I have of my own life. And so this icon of the Trinity by Rublev captures this for the moment when the Abraham and Sarah welcomed the three strangers, giving them hospitality and spending time with them. So it's welcoming strangers and welcoming God. And that moment when I sat with Bridget and I sat with others, we just shared time. And I hope I traveled with them. I know they traveled with me in that part of my journey. It was just shared. I didn't know her life story or that of the others, but to me, how we care for and travel with others at the close of life has absolutely no price at all. It's invaluable, it's priceless. And how we treat and value each other is in many things. And I would include this care at the end of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmela. That was quite beautiful and full of rich insight. And maybe we should just take a moment to let some of that sink in. And we will have a bit of time at the end for kind of questions and reflections. But if anybody in the next couple of minutes, as we sit with that before moving on, wants to say something or to ask something, maybe I could just ask you to, put up your electronic hand or wave or whatever, but otherwise we'll just take, and please feel free to do that, but we'll take a moment just to reflect on all that we've just heard from Carmela. Okay, we'll go on now, but maybe if you had something that was formulating in your mind, save it, and we'll come back at the end. We'll circle back. But one of the kind of inspiration, if that's not too grand a word, behind these talks is the idea that within our community there is great richness and a wealth of experience in terms particularly of, as Carmela was saying, of living the fullness of life and understanding that the fullness of our lives is dependent on being in relationship and plunging into relationship with God, but with each other, and perhaps most importantly at those incredibly difficult times of life, and obviously the end of life is one of them. And I mention that simply because I think you'll all agree that Carmela has just shown, as did Alan and Levon previously, that a little insight into that richness that lives within our community. And it's so wonderful to be able to share that. And also, it takes great generosity of spirit. So thank you, Carmela, for sharing with us. And now we're going to hear from Graham, which will be different because Graham works for the East Riding of Yorkshire Council, the Adult Social Care Department. And I won't steal any of his thunder, but he's going to talk to us. Graham's going to talk to us about his work, or probably it's more accurate to say, Graham, you're going to talk about other people's work, the work of the people that you work with, who are providing care in the community, sometimes in difficult circumstances, and certainly, I think, in terms of resources, very stretched. So this is very much a reflection and from the coalface. So over to you, Graham, and thank you. And Adam's going to spotlight you. Well, he mentioned that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tim. And it was really very inspiring and interesting as well to listen to Carmela. I think what Carmela talks about and what I'm going to talk about overlap, of course, is that we're talking about people. We're talking about care for people. So often in the job I do, we talk about residents and service users, sort of council speak, but we're talking about people receiving care and people delivering care. So just to talk a little bit about adult social care in the community, what sort of settings are we talking about? Well, in the work that I deal with, in the sort of sphere I'm working in, we're talking about residential care. So, many people are familiar with that. Residential homes, nursing homes, where there is a lot of people who live there. It's their home. Staff are there 24 hours a day. Dedicated staff who do medication rounds, staff providing meals, cooks, maintenance men. So like anybody's home, really, but on a larger scale. The area that I'm most familiar with, I'm starting to visit care homes quite a lot. I'm doing some work in there. I was in one yesterday and saw some enormous challenges, really, the sorts of things that the management are facing and the very difficulties that they're having, the great difficulties they're having in all areas. But the area that I've worked most in is home care. And that's different again, because you've got carers who are working for private companies, tens of private companies within a certain geographical area, providing carers who are going into people's homes, possibly 4 times a day, and then moving between calls. So visiting the first person, moving quickly to the second, and the care that they're delivering throughout the day is very different depending on who they're seeing. And also the thing that's different to residential care is that home carers are expected to cover all areas of care. So rather than having your dedicated medication carers within the care home, or those that specifically look after dementia clients, home carers, well, they could be making a sandwich, or doing a domestic call where they're doing some cleaning, some light cleaning. They could be taking somebody out on a social event, social visit. Often it's a visit to a garden centre, especially here, the garden centre now, it's got even less to do with gardens and, more to do with giant cafes and all kinds of shops. So it's, it's something that people like to visit, and people do go and get taken to. But at the other end of the spectrum, the same carers could be carrying out what's called peg feeding, sort of inserting tubes into people's mouths to be able to feed clients who have motor neurone disease, for example, giving care using oxygen, caring for people with very challenging dementia difficulties. So there's a huge range of clients that the same carers are having to deliver care to. And part of my role is checking that the carers have been safely recruited so that they're safe to be with vulnerable people, that they've got their references and DBSs in place, and that they've received all the necessary training. But I think as well, what we look for in my work, and what care companies also look for, is that the caring is person-centered, as it's called. It's a bit of a jargon, I suppose, but it's similar in a way to what Carmela was talking about, that you're not just going in and delivering a task, that the person, you've communicated with them, you found out what they like, what kind of person they are, their background history, what they don't like, what they need, and that you take all of this into account when you go and deliver that call, so that you aren't just treating each client as another person to go through the front door and do some cleaning with and get ready for bed, but you actually getting to know that person, or the team of people that care for the client are getting to know them, that it's based on their likes, their dislikes, and their needs. And I think that is the key thing really about care in the community, whether it's in a home or whether it's in somebody's own home, that you are viewing them as a person first and not just another person on a rota. That's very, very important. Other types of work that are done that we look at are what are called direct payments, PAs, basically, where families will hire their own PA, their own personal assistant, to do all the care for them. One person doesn't work for a company, or just tends to work singly for one particular person, one or two people, doing everything. And then we have specialist services looking at learning disability clients. A lot of what we're doing, whatever client we're looking at, is what's known as strengths-based. In other words, trying to provide care for, trying to promote what people can do. If they are able to do things, that we're trying to promote what they can do. We do work with hospitals called reablement. So people will come out of hospital, maybe they've lost a little bit of mobility, and the carers are trying to get them back to full mobility so that they don't need the care anymore. And it's that sort of positive care, which is really nice to see when people don't need it anymore. So that's really basing it on what their strengths and needs are and developing those strengths. Similarly, with sort of learning disability care, a lot of that is based on promoting independence. So people with learning disabilities may live in a setting of a small number of people, or, maybe a larger set of flats, but the carers are there providing their basic needs, but enabling them really to go and live independently away from that house, so that yes, they're looked after, but they're also able to be independent. And that can also be provided through daycare centres and day opportunities, where people, particularly learning disabilities, will go and work on a farm, or they'll go making something in terms of woodwork, do work which is useful, rewarding, and gives them some payment as well, and promotes more independence and a greater sense of self-esteem. So I hope you can see the great variety of work that's done. And the other thing I want to say is, that shows to me how important this work is, and how special the people are that deliver that work. I go to home care agencies, I meet carers in care homes, and just on another side, play music. I've been into care homes to play music for people as well. And the work they do is very demanding. The hours are very long. The traveling is also very demanding, and travel time is limited. And I'll come on to that in a little while. But I think just thinking a little bit about what Carmela was saying as well about the society that we're in, which sort of promotes and can promote individualism. Just thinking about other societies where people don't tend to move away from home, and all this care would be provided by families, generations looking after younger generations looking after older generations, and wider family networks providing the care. Obviously not the very complex care, but a lot of it would be done within the family. Of course, in the UK, people like myself, I moved away from home to go to university at the age of 18. I've never moved back. My parents are 88 and 90 now. And although my sister is close by, we're a typical example of the way that society is in the UK, where families are more fragmented. And so carers, care companies in whatever type are more important than ever, with family networks not being as extensive as maybe they once were. So the carers are not only providing for physical needs, providing complex medication or care for people, with great difficulties, as I say, with, for example, motor neuron disease, but they're providing some social contact. And for some people, they are the only point of contact during the day. So their presence is very, very important. And just to give a little bit of background to where I work in the East Riding of Yorkshire, this is an area that covers from Flamborough Head, bordering North Yorkshire, down to the Humber, across the Wolds to York, nearly, and borders York, and then the North Sea. It's an area that, being coastal and largely rural, a lot of people retire to. So we have the fastest rising population, or amongst the fastest rising populations of 65-year-olds and upwards, and also one of the fastest rising populations of any county for people with dementia. So the demands to get social care in whatever setting are growing all the time. And as I say, some of the work that carers are doing is almost nursing auxiliary work, I would say. So bearing all this in mind, and as Tim mentioned at the start, there are many challenges. And I guess quite a lot of people will be familiar from watching the news about the challenges. I think, if I've got this right, someone will be able to tell me if I haven't, please. But my understanding is that when the NHS was created, before that, I think care and health had all been together. But on the creation of the NHS, councils kept the care, and the NHS obviously was set up as a separate institution to provide for healthcare. And so the way things have gone over the years, councils would have provided it from their own services. But in recent years, in the last 20 years or so, a bit less, it's become very much private companies. And private companies have to make money to survive. They have to take on clients, and they have to take on as many clients as they can to make rounds of care. In other words, areas of care going from house to house, which are fairly close together, as viable as possible. And this has led to a number of challenges. And somebody just happened to put a note on our work sort of computer chat this morning, on our Teams chat this morning, that said that from an organisation, a charity called the Care Provider Alliance, a survey had been done to say, I think in the coming months or over the next year, 22% of care providers of whatever kind were planning to close their businesses. 73% will refuse new referrals from councils or the NHS. 57% will hand back work because they can no longer provide the care. And 64% will have to make people redundant. And I met a team of managers a couple of weeks ago. And because it's a private industry, their kind of focus is about keeping the business going. I wouldn't like to say it's as much as providing care. Of course it isn't. They are caring people, and the care is at the centre of everything they do, but they have to be viable in order to provide that care. And so there are several things which are, funds available from local and central government impact quite a lot on this. But there are other challenges as well. Challenges such as staffing. Staffing is probably the biggest challenge that is faced at the moment, or one of the biggest, and that's because a lot of people leave care or they don't want to come into care. It's for the work that is done. The payment is at the national living wage. So it's quite complex work at times, very complex work. And certainly for those that are working on their own, providing home care, they are getting quite a basic wage. And many people feel that they could do that with guaranteed hours in a supermarket, or in this area, working on the caravan parks. And that leads me on to another challenge, which is what's called a 0 hours contract, where people only get paid for what they do rather than having a guaranteed wage. This is beginning to change a little bit now, which is good for a lot of people because it makes the work a bit more stable. But it is something. Finding staff is very difficult. Another challenge to staffing was the pandemic, which many people joined the care industry at that time because hospitality and retail had been, temporarily shut down. People were wanting to carry on working, and so they came into the care industry, and that was great. But unfortunately, for the care industry, once those other sectors reopened, people went back to their original jobs, and there was about 165,000 shortfall in carers across the country. Now, one of the things that has been done to try and alleviate that is to start to recruit from overseas, and that has been very successful in some ways. The carers that come across to work from other parts of the world have been very highly qualified, highly skilled, and my sort of assessment of them from what I've seen and what I've heard from those care companies and wider sources are that they're carrying out a really good job and are very, very valuable to the care sector. Been some challenges with that in terms of sort of food, cookery. Cookery is one of the main things that's been a bit of a challenge because unlike Hackney that Carmela was talking about, Hull and the East Riding, well, I don't work in Hull, but the sort of area around Hull and up through the East Riding is not diverse at all. So there have been some various challenges on that, but many of them have been overcome by training and also because the carers do such a good job and, become very friendly with the people they're providing care to. This seems to be working very well. The thing that is very difficult is when we also have to look a little bit at trafficking and modern slavery, because sadly that is something that does occur in this industry. I don't think it's particularly prevalent in this area at the moment, but it is happening in wider parts of Yorkshire. Something that the police, the UK and visa authorities, the gangmasters and Labour Authority are also working on to try and stop this. People being brought into the country under false pretenses, jobs being created that don't really exist, people being exploited financially and in other ways. As I say, it is a minority, but it does happen, and it's something that we have to be very careful of, and something as a council we've had to learn a lot about. And we are trying to improve our knowledge and work with other authorities to try and stop. So I suppose, really, as a kind of summary, I would say that the care sector is a hugely valuable part of care. It does provide care in the community where families can't anymore due to families not being together and due to sometimes the complexity of the care. The clients that are looked after, the people that are looked after come from a huge range of backgrounds, not just the more elderly and frail people that maybe at the sort of how you would tend to imagine that care industry. But now people with very complex needs, younger people with dementia, people with early onset dementia, people with learning disabilities, people from all backgrounds, people who can pay for their care and people who can't afford to pay very much for their care, and get council funding. People who are cared for in their homes, people who are cared for in residential settings, and also end-of-life care has been talked about so well by Carmela. This is also something that carers deliver in different settings in different ways. So it's a very important area, and it's always very humbling to see what is being delivered, the dedication that people have to their work under very difficult circumstances, the dedications that the managers have as well, under great pressures often, and that they will do anything to try and provide good care, good quality care. And, you know, it doesn't always work. And that's where my job comes in as well, where things aren't going so well. We go in and try and support and provide ideas of how to improve the quality of the care, or to improve the quality of training, or the amount of training, and to improve the quality of the recruits. Because I think at the end, the important thing is to care for the people that need the care. You need people with the right values who are caring themselves. And it's very rare that you ever find people, despite what you might see on the news, it's very, very rare that you find people that aren't. Those cases are very few and far between. It's a great testament to people's nature, people's commitment, people's patience, that they are able to do this work. And I hope really that it's something that will become more and more in the spotlight, and will be something that is taken more and more notice of as the population ages and the elderly population and so on grows. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Graham, there was so much in there. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's struck by how, when you really start to talk about caring, the practicalities, and it was there present as well to some extent in Carmela's talk, is that you actually are also bumping up against political realities and, you know, the real world.
Yeah.
Not just, so there's much that we might desire and wish for and hope for that is very difficult to deliver, because, you know, the realities of our system or our systems.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit of time left, and I just would like to, you know, use that time, if we can, for anybody who would like to ask a question or just give a reflection, because I feel that it seems to me, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but that what both Carmela and Graham have talked about are things that touch a lot of us in our own lives, perhaps in relation to elderly parents, or someone that, you know, has particular needs, who's part of our family group or that we know. So I'm sure you know, between us, we actually, there might be things that we want to share ourselves, but can I just throw the floor open for a few minutes? And just, you know, unmute yourself if you want to speak. Gaynor, are you? Yeah.
Yeah. I worked in a hospice in Reading, near where you live, for 15 years. And one of the things that is so special about hospice is that it's holistic care. It's not just the clinical support, though that is very important, but it's seeing people in outpatient clinics so they can manage their pain at home. It's having daycare so that they can meet other people and get regular support. It's about spiritual and psychological care. And it's about having clinical staffs, often specialist nurses, who can go and see people at home. And these are the areas that are being challenged at the moment by shortage of funding. And I know in the unit that I worked in, which has been taken over by a charity, it was a national health unit, is now cutting back on some of these services, which was so essential to holistic care. I know the government, I think today or yesterday, has said they're going to commit a large amount of money to hospices, and that is wonderful, because it's a counterbalance to this this bill about assisted suicide, that if you have much better palliative care and support, there will be less need for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Gaynor. Thank you. Barbara.
Yeah, following on from what Gaynor just said, I am a compassionate neighbour attached to the Princess Alice Hospice. I'm a volunteer, and as a volunteer, you support people who are bereaved and you visit them in their own home. And more, because of lack of funding, they're becoming increasingly dependent on volunteers. I learnt the importance of this in my training, because our hospices are trying to form compassionate communities where people do volunteer. And the benchmark for this is Kerala in India. And it's really held up as being the best. And we experienced this when we went to Kerala for Christmas, and our daughter, who was 14, became sick on Boxing Day. And we were in this hospital in Trivandrum, only knew our hosts. And during the course of the day, word got round in the community that we were in hospital. And I had a trail of visitors all day, bringing food for me, drinks for me, food for Lizzie, copies of the Reader's Digest for me so I didn't get bored, reading material for Lizzie. We had toilet rolls, everything, just to try. And I didn't know these people. And I thought, oh my goodness, I could be in St. Peter's Hospital in Chertsey and only my immediate family would come. And our hospice holds this up as a wonderful example to encourage us all to reach out to others. And I was so struck by both Graham and Carmela, who say, you know, the staff and volunteers meet people where they are. And you may not know them, but you travel with them. And Father Stephen Ortager would say, it's not the journey, it's the company. And you are drawn into a journey of spirit. And in giving, you receive the most enormous amount. I have examples, but I think I better stop there. I won't talk about Doreen now.
Thank you, Barbara. That was a wonderful example, a Kerala example. Thank you. Adam.
Yes, I would like to thank both speakers. It's been really wonderful to listen tonight. And I'd like to thank Carmela especially, because she's helped me to understand something which happened to me 50 years ago. And I don't think I really understood it until tonight. So 50 years ago, when I was a 15-year-old, we had a talk from Cicely Saunders at school. She came and she showed us slides of the care that she was giving in St. Christopher's. And as a teenager, I wasn't really interested in those types of things. I used to go to chapel, but it all used to kind of pass above my head. But she really, really touched me. And the whole talk really, really touched me. And I don't think until tonight I've understood what it was. But I think what she taught me was the value of life. I think that's what really, really touched me. and not just the value of, well, the life of the people who were dying, the life of the nurses, but also my life. I think that's what must have touched me, that it was kind of that life is so precious. And so I just very grateful, because she did cut right through, and she was a formidable person, like you say, Carmela. And I think that Chris Walker knew her as well, because when he was training to be a doctor, he got to know Cicely Saunders. And she was an incredible person. But in any case, tonight, thanks to you, Carmela, I think I've learned something about why it, touched me so deeply. Thank you.
Well, John.
I've got a somewhat similar story to Adam's, in that Mother Teresa came to our school when I was 16. And she was a femme formidable, about 4'6". And the one thing that she emphasized was the importance of every single person. That you do the best you can for the person who is there in front of you. And that was that left quite an impression on me too.
Thanks, John. Yeah. You're on mute, Bit.
So a few months ago, some of us went to Normandy. There's some of us here that remember this. And I didn't read the paperwork very carefully, so I had absolutely no idea that the whole week was going to be on the subject of death. It was absolutely amazing. Thank you to Mike Woodward for putting it together. But I think I took lots of things away from it. But somebody on the week recommended reading With the End in Mind. I haven't got the name of the author to hand. And I thought this would be a very grim read. But if any of you want to read something following on from this talk, I couldn't stop listening. I listened to it on Audible, and I waited to get into my car so I could listen to the next chapter, because it talked, it was following on from talking about, the last minutes of life can be so meaningful for everybody, the family, the person dying. And this book shared so many different examples of how that worked or didn't work. And I'd really recommend it to you, because it just really summarised the week and gave me a lot to think about afterwards.
The book's by Catherine Mannix, and you can find her on YouTube, and her delivery reminds me rather a lot of Carmela, I must say. So there must be some connection there, I would guess. But it is the most extraordinary book, because she builds her whole experience around individual stories, and they just lay on top of each other, with no effort to connect them, but they are connected so much because of the shared humanity and experience.
Liz.
So when I was nursing, I can remember either reading or being told to read this article, and it was either about Cicely, or either about her or by her. But there were two things that I remember. One of the things she said was the reason she set up the hospice movement was because what used to happen is that, you'd have a ward round, and the doctors would be talking about the patient, but not involving the patient in what was going to happen to them.
Yeah.
And the other thing I remember was it was about pain control, because if you were in a hospital there's all these protocols of what you can and can't give a patient. And I think my understanding is that in the hospice movement, they were more willing, to try out more types of treatments in order to make, the end of that person's life better.
Thanks, Liz.
Katie's got her hand up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Katie. And I'd just like to say a special thank you to Katie for using the electronic hand.
So I think listening to Graham, I was thinking about a sign that was posted up. It was the same sign, but it was posted up in 3 different places in my mother's care home. And it said, what is the most important time now? Who is the most important person? The person I'm talking to. What is the most important thing? What they're saying. And that has stayed with me. And I think listening to Graham, when you think of particularly the carers who are leaping in and out of their car and driving from one very different home, different needs to another, so off. Well, I think when I've remembering the carers who were looking after Tim's dad, they all managed to do that. And I think that's an incredible model for us. We may not be caring for sick people or people with needs, but that model of being in the moment and the contact with the other person is such a key one. So listening to you, Graham, that just, I was thinking about those carers and their challenges, and what a model that is for us of real contact and love. Anyway,
Yes.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
I think we're going to have to call it a day there, just because we've run out of time. But I kind of feel if we hadn't run out of time, we could go on for a lot longer, because I think what we're talking about means an enormous amount to all of us, because ourselves, those we love, what we believe in, it's everything. But the way that you, Carmela, and Graham have sort of brought that alive, is just fantastic. Thank you. And just to build on what Katie said there, just, that sense of, I think, care, that's what I've learned. I think the kind of care, the clue is in the word, that you can't care if you're not incredibly caring about every detail. And that you, Carmela, you talked about, I quote you, the enormity of this moment in this person's life. And that's a very high bar, I know, but I think it's following on from what Katie was saying, if we could treat each other or others as though they are the only thing that matter at this moment, at this very moment, the only thing that matters is you and what you're saying, gosh, the world would be a better place. So thank you both so much, and thank you everybody. Thank you for those who shared. It was really beautiful. Yeah, and I think it just shows, the richness that lives by the grace of God in our community. We must be so thankful. And so we'll finish there. I'm just going to, if I may, finish with a very short prayer on everybody's behalf, and then we'll close. So let's just pause and recollect ourselves for a second. Lord, we thank you for everything that we have learned this evening. We thank you for Carmela and Graham especially, and for the encouragement they've given us to respond generously to your call to serve and care for others, especially those most in need of care and compassion. Give us generous and open hearts as we prepare for the coming of your Son. And we make this prayer in confidence and in hope. Amen.
And can I say a very big and warm thank you to Tim for organising this programme, which has been so inspiring for us all as we focus on caring for humanity. So thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to everybody who's contributed.
Yeah,
That's that's a lot of people. So and yeah, including everybody here. So thank you.
Yeah, great.
God bless everybody.
God bless. Thank you
Enjoy
very
the rest
much.
of the